Yeah, well, thank you for those kind words, I'd say. Richard, Judy, UTC, thank you for having me here, and thank you all for coming out this early morning. And hopefully, we'll have some very interesting, exciting things to talk about, which will, certainly impact you as members of the innovation community within Utah. So I'm going to talk about a few things, but just in general, and we'll get a great intro. My improbable career path, which has kind of brought me here today. As you mentioned, I started life as a general surgeon, as a provider within the healthcare system itself. I realized that there were a lot of challenges within healthcare, a lot of ground to cover in terms of improving it. And naively, I thought back then that, well, hey, there's so many manual processes, and if we just automate them, with electronic health records, that should solve the whole problem. So young and naive back then. So I'm certainly involved in a lot of the early implementation and deployment of automated systems, clinical, administrative, operational, in healthcare settings. I joined the vendor side of GE and McKesson, leading up product strategies around certainly physician order entry products. And really that's when I started working on the collision between the electronic health record and the burgeoning and emerging concepts of molecular medicine. And started to really get involved in personalized healthcare and the transformation of healthcare around that space. And so we're going to speak about those themes. We're going to speak about some of the lessons learned. But the one thing more than anything else I want you to take away is that we're seeing things related to this transformation in, it's literally the last 6 to 9 months in 2012 that have been monumental, really transformational in terms of the inflection of where healthcare is going. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about that. I really want to get involved up to the chase in terms of some good questions and answers as well. So let me just give you a little bit of background related to Oracle. I joined back in last October, so we're almost coming up on my year. So Mark, I don't know if I get anything for making it through the first year.
Not 1 year, but we'll recognize you 5 from now.
That's good. That's good. And I do recognize, I think, Richard, that one of the last Oracle speakers you had was Larry Ellison. So I do recognize I represent a steep drop in the quality curve, but I'll try to keep you guys entertained this morning. I think everyone knows Oracle traditionally in terms of solid, foundational technologies that are not necessarily purposed for any specific industry, but certainly generically useful across all of them. So whether that's at the hardware, the database, the middleware, or even the application level itself. I represent the Health Sciences Global Business Unit. So about 10 years ago, Oracle started creating more vertical business units with more of an industry focus to build, to take Oracle's portfolio, but also build new products to be able to really meet the requirements in those industry spaces. And so healthcare is actually one of the last ones to come online. It really started in 2008. The initial focus at that time was on the life sciences and the pharma industry at that point. Through a lot of build of good product and acquisition of a couple companies, Oracle was able to actually lock up pretty much an 80% market share in the clinical trial management software space, to the point now where at any given time there's about 4,000 to 5,000 pharma clinical trials hosted on the Oracle Cloud. So we've become that really 850-pound gorilla when it comes to information management from clinical trials in the pharma space. That becomes very important later on in the story. In around 2009 or so, the focus then said, okay, we have been looking at the life science industry, what's the healthcare play going to be? And for those of you who know, if you remember 2009 in healthcare IT, it was all about a lot of federal stimulus dollars being transformed into incentive payments to providers and health systems to actually adopt EHRs. And so the big strategic question then was, does Oracle get a pony in that race? Do we go out and build an EHR, maybe go buy one, and then really, kind of play in that arms race about the broader deployment? Thankfully, the answer was no. That's going to be, a commoditized market, a lot of players. They're going to be fighting for share, left and right. That's really not where the action and the innovation is going to occur. It's really, the industry's not done a good job in terms of taking data from transactional systems and really using it for secondary analytic purposes themselves. Whether that is the convergence between life sciences and healthcare, whether that's in data collaboration over data instead of competition over data, and some of these new and transformative ways of knowledge management that healthcare really needs to get to. So our focus, from a healthcare point of view, in our global business unit, is that secondary use of transactional data, the ongoing digitization itself from all those source systems, and how you need to create information management platforms that enable that secondary use itself. We really came to market probably about a year ago with a platform and portfolio of solutions in the healthcare and life sciences space for this. We have had a tremendous run in the last year. I put the splash side up here in terms of those are the wins that we've been able to get from a customer point of view in the last year. I've been spending a significant amount of time on the road, really from all the great and good in the healthcare world. Really want to understand, what have you guys developed? Why are, Mayo Clinic, MD Anderson, UPMC, so on and so forth, adopting the solution, and how can it really help us in a critical time in healthcare itself? I like to use this slide because, again, really focusing more on, obviously, the theme of correlated vast stores of knowledge, but the date. This is 1906, right? So, fast forward a century and a few more years, we're still struggling with this issue. But really, what we're looking at in terms of what the future direction of healthcare itself is the big problem is that reactive healthcare needs to change. I mean, we're trying to perform 21st century medicine using infrastructure and an ecosystem that was really created in pretty much the 19th century to a large degree. So reactive medicine, you wait for someone to get ill, you then get in there and try to fix them, and then you get paid based on how many of those people that you actually see. That's been great. We've had a lot of great advances in healthcare, but it's run its course, both in terms of sustainability and primarily from an economic point of view. Well, that's fine, right? But what does the next step look like when the shoe drops here? And really, reactive needs to transform to what we call P4 medicine. So P4 is predictive, it's preventive, it's personalized, and it's participatory. It's in direct contradistinction to pretty much every aspect of reactive medicine. It represents a completely different business model and a completely different ecosystem than reactive medicine itself in terms of how you provide care, how you pay for care, how you regulate care, and frankly, even how customers receive the care. And again, so when we talk about, well, how will genomic medicine really work when the FDA approaches regulation this way or CMS approaches reimbursement that way? That's a good question, but it's the wrong question to ask. The question to ask is, how do we create a whole ecosystem of regulation, reimbursement, provider, and patient behavior that supports and sustains a P4 medicine paradigm itself? And I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions about that. We've known about this to a large degree. We're really starting to see this now. And Medicare reimbursement rates themselves are ratcheting down every year, and they're going to be doing that until the next 20 years or so. This year alone, we're going to see about $11 billion that are going to be cut out of that budget. That represents about a 2% decrease to provider reimbursements in terms of health systems. This is what has CEOs and CXOs of provider organizations going crazy. Healthcare itself, to a large degree, a lot of nonprofit organizations, they don't run on double-digit margins. So when you cut the reimbursement at this level, when you have an aging population, when you have a situation where I think it's 10,000 people every day become eligible for Medicare or Social Security, when you have a population that's getting more and more ill, the value proposition around reactive healthcare is completely upside down. So what's happening in terms of the transformation itself? Well, we talked about reactive healthcare, focused heavily on episodes once illness actually has occurred. Data in this case is usually an exhaust of an encounter. It's not really used meaningfully in an intelligent fashion or predictive or any secondary use intelligence itself. B2B is not business to business here. That's bench to bedside. There's a well-quoted statistic. It typically takes 17 years for something to migrate from a bench discovery to bedside practice itself. Obviously, the payment mechanism itself is fee-for-service, is volume. How many patients did you see? How many of these procedures did you see? The incentive, obviously, is to provide more care, not more quality. And then, obviously, the theme heavily focused on illness and curing it. Today, we're seeing this already start to migrate into the next evolution of stratified care. So you're no longer taking care of individual patients, you're really taking care of cohorts of patients. Those cohorts, groups, are selected based on a specific set of diagnosis characteristics or treatment characteristics, etc. And you're now responsible to take care of that group rather than just individuals. Data, we really need near real-time analytics to power that. That's the #1 requirement in a stratified care environment. And we really need to shrink that 17 years in terms of much more agile insight in terms of how you take care of a specific group of congestive heart failure patients that are women that are 65 years old that have taken these medications and failed them. And again, really, we're trying to understand disease and stratify it at a better level. We know that cancer is no longer one type of cancer. There's about 6 different subtypes really defined at the molecular level, and we're starting to understand that stratification of disease more refined in other capacities as well. The ultimate goal here is B4 medicine. Each individual is surrounded by 1 billion of data points. Those are from electronic health records and the digitization of medicine. Those are from molecular biology and molecular sequencing, the digitization of medicine and biology. That cloud of data then becomes the defining asset for care, prediction, wellness, participation going forward. Really, you see that transactions and analytics become a closed loop in a rapid learning system. You see that research and care will feed into each other. That the insights you learn from taking care of patients gets fed directly into research to create even new innovations in a cycle. And the focus can then really shift to wellness and prevention, and really the quantification of wellness. What we're going to recognize when we have this cloud of billions of data points is that what represents wellness for me is completely different at the molecular level than for Richard or for Kimball or for Suzanne. I hope. I hope you guys don't like me to wellness. But we'll be able to start to quantify that and really characterize and drive it where each individual ends up being their own control. To be able to get to these higher order evolutions themselves, the key component is you need to be able to integrate all the data from multiple source systems, different types themselves, whether it's an electronic health record, whether it's molecular diagnostics, whether it's mobile technologies from biosensors, even health data that's submitted via social media. Patients are admitting all this data all the time. You need to be able to integrate all that data, but then you need to be able to have a scalable analytics platform that allows you to slice and dice that in multiple ways. Okay, so we're zooming closer to some of the things that we've built here, but the platform that we've been really addressing is, this is what the industry really needs now and even more into the future. And these are what we call the hard questions in health. So, some of you have familiarity with the challenges and the complexity of this. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but if you think about a question, this is something that we got directly from our customers, is how is nursing overtime policy affecting our quality scores for ICU and patient satisfaction? Which is, that's a reasonable query. It's a very interesting one to understand. But if you think about how you would actually construct that query today in a given healthcare enterprise, it is complete science fiction. There's 4 or 5 source systems there that have never, ever, they've never talked with each other. The IT department has never been able to wrestle the data out of each one of these. Analysts and BI analysts have never been able to figure out how to normalize the data that's actually made across silo, domain, and a query along those lines. And again, this manifests itself over and over and over again in healthcare, where the question is no longer, how do I see more patients, how do I perform more procedures, but how do I take care of the patients that we're actually seeing and keep them out of the hospital? Okay, and again, the learning healthcare system, this is something that's probably one of the most critical things that's going to evolve. We're no longer talking about silos of knowledge that no longer intercorrelate anymore. We're really talking about data liquidity and transparency of data to really feed this loop itself. We're starting to see this emerge today. That's the good news. We're starting to see that the information management platforms have been built that can enable this in healthcare. And once you provision an industry to really take advantage of digitization that occurs, I think we've seen it over and over again what happens. Okay, so the platform itself, I consider it like a Swiss Army knife. Okay, so if you unfold one blade, you have what we call as enterprise health analytics. This can be used for the C-suite of an organization, of a healthcare system, to be able to deal with the analytics needed around the new accountable care world, the shift to value-based care instead of volume-based care. You unfold another blade, and it becomes the Translational Research Center, so TRC. So TRC is really meant to power the information management needs of the modern molecular research facility today. They need to be able to get integrated data from multiple analytic platforms on the molecular side. They need to be able to get integrated data from all these clinical systems, merge them together, and then obviously be able to reproduce and audit and track the analyses that occur once you merge all that data together itself. This, we've had tremendous amount of success. This is what's kept me in the air for the most part of this summer itself. It's been fantastic run up here. We have Health Information Exchange, HIE platforms, which really are solutions that address the current state-of-the-art in terms of how organizations exchange information between each other. You saw my patient in your emergency room last week. Boy, I'd really like to know what you guys did. And HIE really is meant to kind of create very limited structured messaging around that and exchange that between organizations. It's been out in the industry for quite a while. It does not get me at a high state of technical arousal, but it really does get us to the first steps in terms of data collaboration. So I will give it that. The next evolution really of that is something that we call the Health Sciences Collaboration Network, or HSN. And I'll go through exactly what that means in the implications there. But this is really powering new collaborations between, in this case, pharma and providers around clinical electronic data. In new business models that haven't really been haven't emerged before. Okay, so what do these platforms do, and how do they actually work? I'm not going to go too deep into the actual technologies themselves, but I want to give you conceptually what do we do with the data, where do we get it from, and how do we process it. So, on the left side you have the source systems within a healthcare enterprise, whether they're clinical, whether they're operational, administrative, all the research systems. And there's even more silos up there, I just wanted to throw out. The first step, and there's three problems here in terms of secondary use of this data. So number one, it's a transport problem. Being able to get that data out in a repeatable, easy fashion itself, typically, the state of the art has been, you have to go in and create a lot of custom integrations, use a lot of interface engineering, et cetera. And that typically would work for one situation, but then you have to redo it again if you're at another provider site or if you have more source systems, et cetera. We've productized this capability to really accelerate the time to insight in terms of this first step of transporting the data out of all the walled gardens themselves. The second step then is you're going to have to store and normalize the data. And so we use structured dimensional data modeling to actually make sense of data and make it so that apples and apples and oranges can be compared in the healthcare and the translational space itself. So HDM, or the healthcare data model, really is the repository for all that clinical data in terms of electronic health records, revenue cycle management, financial operational, ERP, all those feeds themselves. And then finally, the third step, once you've transported it, once you've stored and structured it, how do you slice and dice and analyze it? So we take, with the GPU in this platform, we take an app exchange or an app store approach to this. So we have some pre-built analytic apps, which really speak to a lot of the needs today in terms of what the providers need. But we also recognize that, in the era of product-sourced innovation, we need to allow the thousands of flowers to bloom in the field. And so, being able to have the App Exchange, which allows us, one, to integrate in with kind of niche analytic companies that are the best of breed out there. So there may be a specific company that really excels at payer side revenue cycle management, reimbursement, negotiation analytics. They're very good. They've created a nice UI and a nice, set of algorithms and knowledge bases on that. But they're typically not very good at all the back end, which Oracle is really good at, in terms of high process or high volume data management, normalization at scale and performance itself. So we'll work and have them in the App Exchange available to customers. Now, the third piece of the App Exchange is really, we want the customers to be able to start building their own dashboards, their own apps, and being able to publish those into the Exchange itself. And whether they feel that they want to give those away in an open source fashion, really collaboratively, that's fine. Or if they want to pursue commercialization and monetization, that's, we can also support that as well. So these components represent that EHA platform that I talked about before. If you throw in a data model for the molecular data, what we call the Omics Data Bank, or ODB, you then have that Translational Research Center platform that I talked about. If you take that architecture and you put it up into the cloud, and you have some providers that have their own secured spaces for de-identified data as tenants in that cloud itself. And then you have pharma, or frankly even medical device, or comparative effectiveness researchers on the other side of the cloud, and you provision them with analytic apps that allow them to take a look at those provider tenant stores themselves to see if I'm a pharma, I want to see diabetics that are on this pump that have these types of A1C patterns and are females of this age. Does UPMC have any patients that look like that? They'll receive a patient count and say, yeah, you've got 75 of those patients. So that in and of itself represents what classically is taken anywhere from 6 to 9 months of work. You have to manually send people to go extract that data from charts and electronic health records, et cetera. And after 9 months, you may find that you have 0. HSN allows that to, I'm sorry, that's HSN. HSN allows that to happen in a real-time fashion. And not only is it allowed to happen in real-time fashion, but Oracle, in this case, doesn't act as the middle person in terms of the monetization of the provider's data to the innovator, the pharma. That's been the classic model around your IMS healths, your contract research organizations, your CROs. They'll act and allow us to get your data, we'll go shop it around to people. Well, this is a new evolution of the business model. We have created really the e-commerce zone that allows the provider to directly talk with pharma and vice versa. So if Merck finds patients that they're interested in Aurora's data cloud, Merck and Aurora are then free to engage in whatever arrangements that they wish themselves. Oracle doesn't take a cut of that. Again, we've created the facilitated network, and when you create that type of business model, you really make your money not on each individual transaction, but getting the vendors and the consumers together and the click fees, if you will, to a certain degree. So HSN, which I think is kind of bad name. That's not Home Shopping Network, but Health Sciences Collaboration. And again, this really speaks to the value proposition. So going from protocol feasibility, I've got a trial protocol. Is it going to work? Are there patients that actually exist like that out there? All the way getting to site selection and then enrollment. This is 4 to 9 months just on the front end alone. And typically you end up coming up at, no, your protocol's not going to work. Your constraints are too heavy. You need to relax one of them and say, instead of just women 65 and older, I need to have women 55 and older. And your patient count jumps from 0 to 55. But for them to do that, again, pharma, it would take them a long time to be able to get that done. We can now enable that in real-time fashion. Okay, so let's talk about some of the current things that we're doing in terms of where the product and where the infrastructure can go. So, this is, people are really using the deployed product in very innovative fashions. And this is what happens when you get that transparency of data and you get liquidity of data in industry. There's unpredictable uses of this emerge. I don't think that somebody could have foreseen how an ATM would occur. What would happen if banks were working on standards of data sharing and transaction collaboration, et cetera, as to where they are today. But here's one example of that. So our solution allows an organization to say, I'm really looking for all patients in cancer that look like this. They have this type of staging. They've taken these types of medications. They've had these outcomes whether that medication, chemotherapy has worked or not worked, their age, et cetera, et cetera. But then, a customer realized that, wait a minute, if I take a bunch of those and I kind of mush those queries together and I really drive them down to the point of, show me when patients that look like this proceed from stage 3 to stage 4 cancer. And then let's use that as a surveillance query that can really help us, one, with trial matching, because once a patient goes into metastatic stage and end stage itself, unfortunately, they're not going to be around for a long time. So you need to know as soon as possible when that stage transition occurs, because they become eligible for a completely different set of criteria of trials on medications that you can use. If you lose a week in that scenario, that can be, you'll lose your window of opportunity. And not only that, but when you know that those patients transition into that stage 4, the metastatic state itself, you're going to completely enable different kind of care plans and care processes, et cetera. And so this customer is very interested in saying, look, let's have this surveillance query that allows us to know when this happens, and then we can really get our research engine fired up and get our care delivery engine fired up in a completely different way, rather than waiting for a path report to finally come back, and hopefully somebody will pick it up and manage those transitions themselves. So we talked about the infrastructure of the translational research platform in terms of having clean clinical data and integrated omics data itself. That is the exact same infrastructure. That infrastructure being used today for the research and discovery mission itself. But it's the same infrastructure that will power molecular medicine. So, our customer base, we're working together and we're seeing where these workflows are emerging. So one of them certainly is in cancer care. So if you fail first-line cancer therapy, chances are you're going to get some kind of molecular profile. You're going to get your tumor sequenced. And then you're going to find all sorts of interesting things. Now, the workflow is that it's not just a pathologist sitting in an office and then writing an interpretation, and then an oncologist doing something with it. Tumor boards have emerged really as the standard of care. So you get that pathologist in a room with the oncologist, with the surgeon, with the genetic counselor, with an ethicist in some cases, so on and so forth, that interdisciplinary team. And they meet on a regular basis to kind of discuss these complicated cases. The main technology used to power that right now is PowerPoint. But each of them will bring a little bit of the care scenario, and they'll create a couple slides, and then we'll talk about it manually. Since we're already touching all of the transactional systems themselves, whether it's electronic health record, or the pathology reporting system, or the molecular, or the diagnostics systems themselves, we already have the wiring and the plumbing together the data. Creating a new UI that actually allows them to have different views of all that patient scenario isn't hard in any way. And so this is, it's just low-hanging fruit, but something that's surprisingly not really easy to get to out there. So, again, once you start to then look at, okay, I've got a woman with ovarian cancer. They have these, I've sequenced them, I've sequenced the tumor, and they have these, they got these 2 primary mutations, which we already all know are associated with ovarian cancer. But then they have these other 4 secondary mutations, which the literature hasn't, and science hasn't really figured out exactly how those impact, ovarian cancer itself. Well, it'd be really nice to be able to then zoom out to your transaction base and see, have I seen other patients like this? Have I seen other ovarian cancers with these 2 primary mutations, with these 4 secondary mutations? And I'd like to see what chemotherapies they were started on, and also, what happened once those chemotherapy, what was the outcome that happened? So if you imagine you're an oncologist, you're seeing this, you can immediately fire this patient's like mine query, and you can see that, hey, our organization has seen 10 patients like this, and in 2 of them, this chemotherapy, Tarceva, worked and gave them a good outcome in terms of survival. So right there, you've got a golden moment. You've got a nugget of new insight in terms of how you're going to take care of that patient today, the care part, And now you've identified 10 patients, which represent a very interesting cohort to do some additional molecular profiling. Is there something going on once you have these 2 primary mutations and these 4 secondary mutations? A new mechanism that we hadn't identified before. That's the learning healthcare system in action right there. You've got care and you've got research and the insights occurring in real time as you speak. Okay, so the customers that we've been able to have, we get them together in these strategic development partnership programs themselves to really work together and build a product. And like I said, we don't get a bunch of smart people at Oracle and lock them in a dark room and they come back with a list of requirements and then we build on that. We actually get these pioneers and they influence heavily the front end of the R&D pipeline. So we recently convened this SDP group in Boston to talk about what the next version is going to look like. And I put this up here because basically what people realize when they realize who was in the room, when they realize that each and every one of these people are using the same information management platform, and when we're all looking at trying to create what the next step related to molecular medicine is, we got comments from several of them to realize that, we've been talking about this for a decade. But we're now realizing that just because of the weight of the people in this room and the fact that we have transparency of data between organizations, is that we're going to be recreating the de facto standards in terms of how this new great new world of personalized healthcare is going to emerge. Which I thought was actually is a little bit of an epiphany that kind of floored me, but also massively interested and excited me as well. Okay, so a little bit about, again, I talked about 2012 and why things are different, and I think if you've been involved in any industry or you're in the forest too long, it's really hard to see out of the trees as to what's going on, big picture. So if you think about personalized medicine, personalized healthcare itself, it certainly followed classic Gartner hype cycle in terms of you get that initial technology enabler, that triggering technology. The industry gets completely hyped up and excited about this. They get to a high level of technical arousal, if you will, followed by, once the promises and the hype and the hyperbole don't deliver, you're down in this trough of disillusionment. But eventually, you get people understanding, wait a minute, this is how those technologies are going to manifest, up into this, plateau and a steady state itself. My hypothesis is that this are the milestones related to personalized transformation of healthcare. In 2009, there was all this hype about something that was called Coumadin pharmacogenomics. So some of you may know what that is, but maybe not. So Coumadin is a blood thinning drug. It's probably one of the top 5 prescribed medications out there today. It's used for basically if anybody has atrial fibrillation, and you don't want them to throw a clot, you get a stroke. It's used if people get prosthetic valves anywhere in their hearts. Or in their vasculature, that they can throw a clot from those valves and those prosthetics themselves. It is a nasty drug to prescribe. I personally had 2 patients bleed on Coumadin. It's really hard to get people to this narrow therapeutic window where sometimes it will take forever to get them to the right level of coagulation, or you can completely overshoot and they're going to show up at the ED with a lot of hemorrhaging. So this is really, really tough stuff. They found that there's 4 genes that can be predictive of about 50% of the variation in terms of how you respond to that medication itself. There have been algorithms created that basically will say if you have this type of gene profile from those 4 genes and you have these other factors, this is the loading dose that you start them on, and this is the maintenance dose, and this is how you monitor them. Today, right now, literally, when I was a resident, I was taught, how do you figure out how you start somebody on a Coumadin regimen? It was, which way is the wind blowing? It's complete, intuition in terms of that. To be able to have these dosing algorithms powered by the science and understanding the genes themselves, and this is a slam dunk in terms of value proposition from a clinical point of view. Everybody in the industry is racing to come to the party. So we had a desktop sequencer, gene analyzer, I should say, that could give a result in 90 minutes on these 4 genes. I, at that time, was working on the electronic health record side of things. I was fast and furiously coding modules that be able to take that data and all the other data, the open source algorithms, dosing algorithms there, and then really fire that electronic order. Private payers are actually starting to put out advanced guidance to say, hey, consider reimbursing for this. This is going to be coming up. In June 2009, after that whole groundswell of activity and excitement, CMS, Medicare basically, said, we're not going to pay for this. We don't think that there's enough evidence from an outcomes point of view that doing this will then impact better quality and lower costs themselves. And all the air of enthusiasm went out of that balloon itself. We picked up the pieces, so let's fast forward to 2012, what's going on? Different picture. So the Mayo Clinic is one of our customers, and the Mayo Clinic has publicly noted that in last year, they lost $700 million taking care of Medicare patients. They expect to lose $1 billion taking care of Medicare patients this year. Now, it's not because they provided bad care. It's not that they provided shoddy or unintegrated care. I mean, it's the Mayo Clinic. This is what they do. This is all they do. The problem is, again, that upside-down value proposition around reactive medicine. CMS is driving the reimbursement rate down. There's more and more older people. Those older people are manifesting at sicker and sicker levels. Reactive medicine is a losing proposition. The CEO, the new CEO, John Noseworthy, recognizes that if we keep down this path, Mayo's going to lose. There's a tremendous risk for having its brand diminished, all of its advantages commoditized, and really Mayo's going to be a memory in the past itself. So he has, really, it's no longer, I'd love to be able to get our organization to a point where we can do P4 medicine. That would be nice. It's no longer an aspiration. It is a survival imperative in his mind that we have to figure out how to do this. So to mobilize, they have invested probably, it's not publicly noted, but it's got to be, we know it's probably around 9-figure investments. Hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of 3 centers of innovation. But they focus heavily on how our molecular medicine and genomics themselves going to impact healthcare, how that data is going to be used. They publicly stated that they are going to sequence the complete genomes of 100,000 people in 5 years and use that data at the point of care. They're also investing heavily in stem cell and regenerative medicine, as well as advanced care models. But again, this is 9-figure investments from Mayo Clinic, who is they're always up there 1, 2, 3, in a pretty good post, but they recognize that there's going to be there's rain coming, there's going to be a flood, and we better start building the hard as soon as possible. I can give you examples over and over. OHSU up in Portland. There's about $150 million investment, primarily from the Knight Foundation, which is Nike money. But again, to really create the Knight Cancer Institute. And that is meant to really figure out how you're going to change the face of cancer care itself along a lot of the aspects that we just talked about. That whole metastatic reminder query itself was discussions that we had with them there. Innova Health System is a community health system in Northern Virginia. It's a community health system. They have no academic or research pedigree or roots at all. What they do have is coffers of money because they're in one of the richest counties in the area, in the country itself, in terms of Northern Virginia. The CEO there recognized that they need to get on this train as well. So having no research or academic or any of those creds at all, they invested $150 million to stand up the Innova Translational Medicine Institute, ITMI, which is really meant to, one of the big projects they're looking at is they want to find 500 pregnant mothers. They want to sequence the mother, the father, and the embryo. And they want to analyze that triad in terms of how do you predict preterm labor, preeclampsia, all of the maternal fetal medicine complications in a predictive and preventive fashion. And again, for a community health system to get into that space, clearly they see that this is the future. We need to get ahead of the curve itself. I can go on and on. There are enormous amount of investments. And again, things that you would not have seen, frankly, even a year ago. And that's what I call the student body left. People are really starting to line up around this in terms of strategic regional investments. Okay, so let me give you, so we talked about Innova. PACER is something called the Partnership to Accelerate Clinical Electronic Research. That's actually not bad for an acronym. I'll set it up. But it's about 11 or a dozen or so academic medical centers in New York State, and they have gotten together and said, if we pool our clinical electronic data and we have pharma at the other end of the table, we feel that we can generate new revenue streams, but also accelerate the discovery of drugs themselves. They're using our HSM solution to power that collaboration itself. The New York Genome Center. So in New York, you know, and I'm sure as you guys will know, from a life sciences biotech point of view, doesn't actually have the greatest footprint. It doesn't really have the epicenter of assets or pedigree. I mean, there's big pharma, but they're all in like Jersey and Brooklyn, so that doesn't necessarily count sometimes. They have stood up what's known as the New York Genome Center. So that is they've raised 115, but they're probably going to get about $150 million when all said and done. They're going to engage in 3 or 4 population genome sequencing studies, a lot of them around Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative disease. They're really looking at this heavily from a regional economic development point of view in terms of the jobs and knowledge workers, the clinical researchers that you're going to attract. And that's really where big investment, but also kind of the economic benefits when you start to really get into that industry. And again, they're really looking at a $3 billion investment in this over 12 years. Mayor Bloomberg's office is, giving them all sorts of great perks to stand this thing up in New York. And the conservative estimate is that 500 direct FTEs, but we all know the indirect impacts of these things are can be astounding. Okay, so before I came to Oracle, Kimball mentioned I founded something known as the P4 Medicine Institute, and I talked about what P4 Medicine actually means. And I founded that with Lee Hood. And for those of you who know, Lee Hood invented automated DNA sequencing, so he's to blame for a lot of this stuff that we're trying to deal with today. But he invented it, and obviously was heavily involved in the Human Genome Project in about 2000, late 90s, 2000s, and recognized that we need to, science by itself, and the innovation from technology by itself is not enough to impact how an industry is going to change. Human Genome Project concluded, you didn't necessarily see all the massive innovation transformation you were needed. So we created the P4 Medicine Institute, recognizing that it's not just science and technology, but it's also the social and societal aspects that need to be addressed as well. So how do we transform this across the board? I spent a lot of time here in the Utah area. There's a lot of history and connective tissue between Lee Hood and the legacy of human genetics and innovation here in the Utah area itself. And what we rapidly recognized was it is a catalog of tremendous assets that could be applied to the problem, the challenge, the opportunity of personalized healthcare itself. And the top of the diagram, obviously, these are world-class healthcare organizations, academic medical centers, providers, researchers, et cetera, on the healthcare side. Going clockwise here, there's a lot of great convening, facilitating, supportive organizations, whether it be Governor Levitt's consultancy, the UTC as an organization itself, and certainly GoEd and things going on from the governor's levels. In terms of funding sources or supportive sources that really want to see Utah really capture a glorious opportunity in terms of being a global leader in this transformation of healthcare. No shortage. Scott Anderson, Zions Bank, he runs a commercial and investment bank, but in terms of his interest in seeing something great in this community, in terms of being able to play a part in that is, frankly, very reassuring, very comforting to know that we have that type of support. And it certainly goes for things from a Legacy Foundation point of view, and obviously the USTAR program in itself. And we talked about healthcare at the top of the slide, but obviously there's the whole technology, the life sciences, and the innovation that have really arisen in this area itself. I throw Ancestry.com up there because I think that's a very interesting way that P4 Medicine will emerge. So I can tell Kimball that he he shouldn't eat this, that he should drink more of that, or smoke less of this, or whatever. But is he going to change his behaviors? Probably not. But there are moments where you are susceptible, if you will, where you are engaged in understanding a little bit more about your own personal health information. One of those gold moments is actually concurs at the same time that you'd be interested in becoming an Ancestry.com subscriber. So, usually what happens here classically is Uncle Harry passes away, and now you're thinking, boy, I'd like to know that side of the family, I'd like to understand what happened there, and then, you really start looking at your pedigree and your legacy, and then you recognize that, I play a key role here in terms of I take care of the kids, and I'm taking care of all the preceding generation here as well. So you end up being that I'm just guardian of this pedigree, of this information exchange of biological data to a certain degree. So I really need to see what do we need to do and understand about these kids and their ancestors, et cetera, from a health point of view that actually makes sense. So you start really understanding a little bit more, not only about your own health, but you want to know more information. Ancestry recognizes this. They have DNA samples on 10,000 of their 1.5 million subscribers. They're trying to understand how to use that information and what is that right way to is it an app, is it a widget? You can't just give the sequence information, but you can process it in some way. So again, looking at genomic data in this case, not from a classic healthcare point of view, but where you have the eyeballs captured. These people are getting on the Ancestry.com for a reason, and having knowledge of their genetic pedigree in this case, frankly, is very interesting. That's what People for Medicine looks like. It's not about going to see a provider when you're ill, or someone in a white coat or anything like that. It's about care and the ability and opportunities for care to improve embedded into your daily life, so you don't even realize that it's healthcare. Anyway, sorry about that transgression, but that digression there. But these are the types of assets in terms of the supersaturated solution that you have here. And what we recognize is the two elements that are really needed: the anchor organization, so the string that actually allows the supersaturated solution to create rock candy. Somebody needs to stand up, pick up the flag, and really lead the charge itself, in this environment. And then two, okay, well, let's say that an organization or an effort itself occurs. What's a sustainable business model around that? Important, certainly, but not as important as identifying that anchor organization that feels that this is what we're passionate about. Yes, there's going to be ROI, but not only is this important to our organization, but the whole region itself. So the key thing, again, we have been, I spent about 2 years here kind of going around the horn circle, working with Rich and Kimball and many others in terms of who could that anchor organization be. The sustainable business model piece is actually something that's very interesting now that Oracle's created an information management platform and data transparency. So you can imagine that pretty much many of the organizations here could benefit from a lot of the value proposition of the information management platform or translational research center, et cetera. An anchor organization could potentially leverage that need and create revenue sources in terms of licenses from those organizations themselves. So AARP needs the capability to store some gene profiling data around their patients, and they're not interested in building it themselves, and there's not very many good other solutions. Intermountain has genetic interpretation services that they need to plug some of this data in, but also capture data from other parts of the organization. Huntsman Cancer Institute, et cetera. The list goes on and on. But that does represent a viable revenue stream of using the solution itself for the anchor organization. The second one is HSN. So just like in PACER, it's the Health Association of New York State is actually the convening body for those academic medical centers. This anchor organization could be the same for the data stores within the Utah organization. They could deal with all the standards and the protocol, some of the managing all the IRBs and consent policies of each one of the constituent organizations, and certainly receive part of the revenue stream that comes back from our medical device or pharma there. Obviously, the whole concept of population genomics research. This anchor organization could certainly facilitate things like that. There is no shortage of high net worth individual and foundation money, development dollars out there that would really be interested in funding Utah population population type genetics and genomic studies themselves. And this organization could really bring together the key constituents and stakeholders and get that project mission and really plug it together with the development money itself. Software innovation, this is actually one of the critical things. Once you start to have a bunch of genomic data from whole genome sequences and a bunch of clinical data, then you have a data asset that you can start to build the apps that are needed for use of that data by providers, by consumers, and frankly, even other stakeholders we don't even understand at this point. And so certainly innovation and a roadmap of software that could be commercialized as a revenue stream itself. And then, there's regional expansion. The same issues and challenges and needs around this data that you have here extends easily to the other Intermountain states. So even from that local point of view, and certainly from a global point of view, you can think about exactly how do you export it and have these services available to those that need it. So much of this being, in kind of SaaS and cloud-based offerings, and geography is not one of it. So again, really one of the big things to be able to pull this together, who is that organization? But I certainly think that each and every organization involved in UTC, even in this room, could have interest, could play a part in some way. And so, certainly the question is, what role should any or each of you potentially play in this as we really try to get this training going down the tracks. So thank you for that. I'm going to conclude and definitely take probably tons of questions and answers that we can cycle through right now. So thank you.
This transformation you talk about to personalized healthcare, what role, if any, do you see accountable care organizations playing in that?
So there's actually a couple. Accountable care is really one of these big tailwinds that we've had for personalized healthcare. So in accountable care, it's, I may be oversimplifying this. I am a surgeon, so I tend to think about the world a little too simply sometimes. But no, rather than saying I saw 1,000 patients and I performed 1,000 surgeries on them and then paid me for that, it's you're going to have a finite set of money for those 1,000 patients. You're not going to get any more. So whether you see them and incur the expenses of the cost, or whether you don't, that's your problem. Organizations recognize that they need to figure out innovative ways to keep these patients out of the hospital, to keep them healthy as well. A lot of them are realizing that in some cases, personalized healthcare, understanding the molecular profiling and how that leverages makes a lot of sense. Some organizations also recognize that we don't quite yet understand or know all of the entire molecular picture around these, but we will soon. And to be able to do that, we need to have a system where we start to capture this data and start to create that learning healthcare system. And I will, frankly, there is certainly a large swath of people that are trying to figure out the ACO issue and saying, it's just not ready for prime time yet, so we're not going to think about it. But we will keep an eye open. Please call us when something's ready. But it does force the issue and the opportunity to the table in ways that, frankly, have never been discussed in a real fashion. So we're excited about that.
Thanks, Brett. I'd be really interested to hear your sense of how Utah could play in this constellation. Are there other big efforts out there that Utah could kind of become a part of, and what kind of investment does a state need to make to become a big player?
I mean, again, there's a lot of references in terms of what we've seen in the last year. I mean, we saw the New York Genome Center. You're looking at, overall, to really do these things right, I would say, I mean, it's an open-ended question, but certainly a 9-figure level seems to be a standard that's emerging out there. And there's other examples like that. What I think, I don't think Utah should approach it from a Me Too perspective in any way. I think actually have some very unique things beyond just taking population genomic studies for research point of view and tracking pharma, et cetera. Again, I think something that there's a real need for out there is the development of applications and solutions that leverage this data and certainly help the providers and healthcare systems themselves in terms of how they can use the data, but directly to the customers and consumers. Now, I know there's been a lot of direct consumer, the 23andMe's, the Nepogenics, et cetera, but this is something different. This is something using real data that's not only genomic, it's also the clinical data, it's also data on the patient's life, and finding some really interesting ways to drop an app in a person's life so that they're going to really hit that thing every day when they use their smartphone. That's the type of kind of innovative lateral thinking that I think we've seen over and over again in terms of UConn's technology history and innovation. I think that you have enough of a community, but it's not too big, or the fault lines, if you will, haven't been drawn where there's too much competition for that type of collaboration to occur. And I think that you've got some very active and strong nexus and key interconnecting organizations to bind it all together. I think those are the chocolate, the peanut butter, and the wrapper that you can really make something interesting on. So we've got two simultaneous. We'll go with you first and then in the back.
Was there, with your model and what you're talking about here, are you talking anything about preventive type of care, where the individual is trying to find out for themselves what they need to do to take care of their health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's all types of reactions towards health data itself. There's certainly a cohort of people that really actively want to understand every single aspect of risk, where they are in any given time, so that they can really change their behaviors themselves. Unfortunately, that cohort is the minority. I think that for the most part, you're going to have people that you can just shout into their ears till you're blue in the face that you're going to have this, this, and this. These are your risk states. And they just can't change their behaviors or whatever it is. So again, that push model will work in some situations. And I think we should identify exactly and characterize who that will work for and create the solutions needed there. But the push model for the other 90% or whatever it is that doesn't work for, we need to understand where they react around their health data itself. The absolute goal is to get to a point where it's, preventive medicine is a good way to put it, but it's really, it's again, the focus on maintaining, your health and your wellness. It starts with wellness quantified, but it extends and evolves into something beyond that, where you're not consciously changing your behavior to improve health, but you're consciously changing your behavior because it's something you want to do or you like to do.
Earlier in your talk, you sort of mentioned the inflection point in the whole, like interconnection and collaboration within the industry and sharing data. I was wondering what your take on, like, what was happening that sort of motivated people to start knocking down their walled gardens in such a way that these kinds of interconnected things can start happening?
Yeah. It's the same thing that happens when you have digitization in any ways. I mean, every industry starts manually. Every industry starts with competition over data. And you secure it and you don't share it with anybody else. And you try to be, the biggest, dog in the pack along those lines. Digitization really forces that naturally to occur. Customers start demanding more data. Innovators within the industry realize that, wait a minute, if we actually share data here, we don't have to worry about this anymore. And it allows us to do that. Right? So, certainly from a research point of view, people have been, understanding that this whole, if you think about research, one of the big skill sets have been to date is the hunter-gatherer who goes out and finds a data set and then keeps it for themselves in their lab and doesn't share it with anybody else. The research industry at this point has said, look, enough is enough. I mean, you guys are really impeding your own progress across the board if you don't start to collaborate around this. There have been several example projects of what happens when you do share the data itself, you don't compete on it, and the innovation that happens. I'm going to refer you to something called the Cancer Genome Atlas Project. It's something that is an example of what collaboration occurs in research, and people recognize that even more in the care delivery side as well. There's a hospital over there, yeah, we compete, but you know what, they figured out a care protocol that actually allows atrial fibrillation patients to be healthier or something like that. I'd like to understand exactly what that is. Let's exchange that. And it's not about the fact that you created it, but it's about can you execute it as an organization against that? Because there's often a lot of change management involved in those things. And again, that's becoming more and more the awareness out there in the industry.
Before we take this last question, let me just make a couple of comments. Could we get you to give us some feedback when you are drawing? If you would put those on your table, we'll come around, collect those, let you do a drawing, and give Dr. Parks well-done work away. And why don't we make this a final question?
Yeah, my question is, if you look at a lot of the popular EMRs out there, a lot of those are, for lack of a better term, closed systems. Take Epic systems, for example, very popular amongst the large hospitals. Runs on InterSystems cache amongst back-end, and it's not known to have robust reporting and pushing data out. So with your solution in situations like that, are you doing an end run around EMR vendors in order to extract that information, put it elsewhere and manipulate it, especially to deliver your healthcare analytics solution to the hospitals? Or are you finding clinical vendors are willing to partner with you very actively in order to make their system easier to work with in order to deliver that sort of information?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wouldn't characterize it as an end run. I characterize it as the transactional systems working that layer are incapable, just for the reasons that you mentioned, of creating these types of insight knowledge. They weren't architected and engineered to even think about healthcare collaboration in 2012 as opposed to when they were built in 1980. So we have to extract it up to an analytics layer, do the insight itself. Firing back into the transactional system is the last 100-yard thing. Right now, Epic isn't returning our calls. But Epic will return our calls when 50% of their customer base is using our analytics solution. And say, this is actually where we need the knowledge generated. Your system is just the last mile of getting the order transacted. Go figure out how to integrate these things. So that's kind of how we see that. Okay, thank you guys.